Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Mardek, and of course last time we successfully completed Zach's arena run, and, well, let's just take a second here to acknowledge how and why Zach was able to deal so much damage. So, part of it was that, yes, he is level 52 at the moment, which means that he's getting a little bit of damage based on that, and of course has additional offensive reactions that he can use with all of his RP that he's gained along the way. But the big thing is that we were using Sin Strike, and Sin Strike's damage is based on, yes, Zach's level, but also the number of kills that he has. More specifically, you get, on average, about 3 damage per kill, and as you can see here, Zach has 3, 4, 5 times as many kills as many other people in the party at the moment, and so that is the primary way in which Zach was scaling that much damage, specifically with the Sin Strike ability. So that's why Zach was so successful in his arena run there. However, we still have one more arena run remaining. Whose arena run, you ask? Well, the person who's been waiting patiently for all of his friends to finish, that of course being none other than Mardek. So, let's take a closer look at what Mardek has going on so that we can talk strategy before we go into his arena. So he's level 62, so of course, what with Mardek always being in our party, that means that he's been picking up a lot of experience as other people have been preparing for their arena runs, so he's already at over 2,000 life and 150 MP even before we're talking about any skills and items, so that is pretty fantastic. In terms of attributes, he starts out with 18 strength, which is quite high, and 16 vitality is also very good as well, and that is partially the reason why he's already at above 2,000 HP, which is well above the threshold that we're usually looking to reach with other people, was somewhere over 1,000 HP to avoid getting one shot. If we were able to get up to 1,500, then that was great, but it looks like for Mardek we might be able to go even well above 2,000. Then Spirit at 12 is certainly on the lower side. Mardek does not have any spells other than healing abilities, so that means that yes, the Spirit is affecting how much he can heal with those, but it's not like he has any offensive spells that we're scaling damage with based on the Spirit, so the primary way in which Spirit is helping us is just by boosting his MP, and we're also boosting MP from him being a fairly high level, so for that reason, shouldn't be much of a concern to boost Spirit any further. The agility, that's a little bit more concerning, because at 9, that means that he is quite slow, and almost all enemies will go before him, so that does mean that they will get the chance to hit him before we have the chance to take them out, so all the more reason why it's important for Mardek to be able to tank at least one hit from strong opponents, if not multiple hits from a group of enemies that are all quicker than him. But now let's talk items here. So Mardek, of course, has many options because he is both capable of wearing heavy armors and using shields, so he's very similar to Vern in that regard. Vern, we did see that a couple of items that he and only he was able to equip, so of course Mardek is not able to use any of those. Let's start off with weapons here. So at the moment I have the Champion Sword equipped. That is a pretty low damage weapon, back from the end of Chapter 2. Was the strongest sword in Chapter 2. It is light elemental, but at 32 attack, unlikely we'd want to use this one here. Then if we go to the elemental swords that we picked up along the way in Chapter 3, strongest of those would be the Forest Edge, the Earth elemental sword, giving us 40 base attack and +1 vitality. So that's a strong candidate. Then if we were to go to the Flame Tongue, slightly lower in the attack, although it does have +1 strength, so in some ways that's almost making up for it. Fire elemental, of course. Then as we go further down the list, the Fish Slayer, now at 37 attack, +1 Spirit, means that this definitely would have less damage than the other alternatives. Then we have the Aeropolitan Scimitar, is the Air Elemental Sword, 36 attack, so lower still, though it does have the higher crit chance, 10 versus 3 that we're seeing on these ones here. It's a little bit better in that regard, and +1 agility would cover for that weakness a bit. Then I threw in the Blood Sword here because it is Dark Elemental, so if we were terribly concerned about trying to find a way to deal dark damage, then this would probably be the best way to make that happen. At 30 attack, it is rather weak, so it's probably still not something that you'd be too keen on using. It does drain HP, so it would be another source of HP restoration for Mardek, but I think all in all, that's a pretty big sacrifice in terms of the damage, so probably not going to go that route. For that reason, I think we keep it simple here, go for the Forest Edge for the highest base damage, And then, of course, Mardek, as we'll talk about in a bit, does have access to numerous skills that allow him to have access to any of a number of elemental damages, so for that reason, it's not a huge deal as to which type of damage these weapons are dealing. Next, let's talk chest plates. So, Mardek, as we were saying before, does have access to heavy armors, which means the Mithril Plate Mail is an option, does have 15 defense and 5 magic defense, meaning that it is the strongest in terms of base defenses there. In terms of other things it has going for it, a little bit of strength, a little bit of spirit. 80 MP is certainly not bad. Then a little bit of resistances to ether and light. So the primary reason why you would use this would be because it has the highest base defenses and the little bit of strength, spirit, and MP. Actually, that's a pretty sizable amount of MP. It does make it easier for Mardek to use his skills more aggressively. Won't need to rely on our default attacks quite as often to save MP. So this would be a pretty strong option for sure. I think we did opt to use this on at least one other person who had access to heavy armors. I think that was Slinik. Then we have the Salakian Plate Mail, which is also heavy armor, so also something that only Mardek, Vern, and Slinik can equip. It does give 9 defense, which is lower than the Mithril Plate Mail, and does not give any magic defenses, so in terms of pure defenses, it is certainly worse. +2 Spirit is comparable, though, but it doesn't come along with that MP, which is a nice bonus on top of that. No strength either. It does give much more in the way of light resistance, 50 versus 20, and then it also gives 50% air resistance, which Mithril Plate Mail does not have any of that. So in terms of pure resistances, this is definitely stronger. It does also give 100% resistance to curses, meaning that Mardek will be able to use his skills more often. So for that reason, this is less in the way of pure defenses, but perhaps still another strong candidate. Next, we're looking at the Night Jacket. That is, of course, our go-to for almost everyone. Reason for that being that it has such high elemental resistances, mostly dark, but then even a fair bit of fire, water, air, and earth. No defenses between magic or physical defense, so for that reason, you are sacrificing a fair bit in that regard, especially if you compare that to something like Mithril Plate Mail. So maybe that would be a reason not to go with this one, but it is still certainly a strong candidate as well. Then the Lesser Rainbow Shirt is a little bit of middle ground, because it does have decent defenses at 6 physical defense and 3 magic defense. The resistance is, there's 10% on basically everything besides Ether and Fig, so it's doing something in that regard, but definitely not nearly as high as we see on the Night Jacket here. So it's not the best at anything, but it does do a lot of little things well. Then we could go into pure resistances of one variety or another, the Flame Mail, of course, being pure fire resistance here. At 7 defense, it's solid in that regard, but still no magic defense either, so that is a bit of a sacrifice in that way. Trilobite Armor, similar story, except for water resistance this time, and a little bit less for the defenses, and then the Geo Jacket Earth resistance in this case, but no defenses, little bit of life. Does that make up for it? Probably not. For Mardek, we are likely not as concerned about HP as we were with other people, because he has so much HP to begin with, well, with him being level 62 right now. Then we could consider the Stoles as well, the Seal Stole being high in physical defense, and also does give physical resistance 50%, so if we were concerned about getting hit hard by attacks, then this could be a way to mitigate that damage a bit, but with no magic defense, that is also a bit of a sacrifice in that regard. And we could go for the +6 Stoles, either the Azure for Spirit, Green for Vitality, or Scarlet for Strength. And at least in the case of the Azure Stole, I think this is possibly the weakest of these options for Mardek, because as we were saying, the Spirit is not terribly helpful for him. It does give him mostly the MP, does boost the effectiveness of his healing abilities, yes, but in all likelihood, we're probably going to end up using potions to restore HP instead. So for that reason, I'd say Azure Stole, probably not what we want to go with. If Mardek were not such a high level and did not have so much HP, then the Green Stole would probably be a stronger candidate here. However, because he has over 2,000 HP already, Green Stole probably not necessary. This is usually my go-to for people like Solar, who start out with low HP. Then the Scarlet Stole, we were saying with Zach that this was maybe a decent fit for him because he's so strength-oriented, and in some ways Mardek is as well, just to a slightly lesser extent, because he will use MP a little bit more often, so the Spirit does have a little bit more value to him. But in terms of boosting the effectiveness of his attacks, then this would be the best of these 3 Stoles, of course, so you could consider it, but I think we probably would rather prioritize defenses a little bit more than this. So for that reason, I'm actually intrigued by going with the Night Jacket here, and you will see why in just a second, because I think that the resistances are of course fantastic, and with all the other options that Mardek has, we can go pretty crazy in that regard. So next, let's talk shields. And so we could go with the Rune Shield. That one gives us just 1 physical defense, but 10 magic defense, so it would be the best magic defensive shield if we wanted to go that route. That would perhaps be a way to cover for if we were to use one of the chest plates that did not have any magic defense. But I think that we have some other alternatives here that I want to consider as well. We have the Wing Shield, which we were talking about recently with Vern. This one we got from the bandits in the Earth Temple. That is the only place you can get it. Gives 4 defense, which is okay, but no magic defense, and that's still not a ton of physical defense either. Plus 1 agility would help a bit because Mardek is rather slow. The way that this stands out, though, is that it does have a lot of resistance to air, which is usually one of the more difficult resistances to get because we don't have any chest plates that specialize in air resistance, and we don't have any passive abilities that give us 50% air resistance either. So for that reason, it could be good for that, and also 25% resistance to earth. That one is a little bit easier to pick up because, of course, we could go for the Geo Jacket, and the Geo Jacket also teaches us the resist earth ability, so that one's not as big of a difference maker, but it is a nice little bonus. Maybe we wouldn't need to put on resist earth, and we'd already be in a good place for earth resistance if we were to use this shield. So this is definitely also a strong candidate as well. Then we have the Glyph Shield, which is in some ways a little bit similar to the Rune Shield Plus in that it has just 1 defense and high magic defense, not quite as high, with 6 relative to 10. So we're sacrificing a little bit on the magic defense front. However, we are gaining 16% resistance to fire, water, air, and earth. So in terms of the total resistances, if you add all these up, it is a little bit less than the Wing Shield here. The Wing Shield is actually the best in terms of total amount of resistances on the shield spot. However, this one is a little more balanced here, and so does make it a little bit easier to find ways to get to a good place for all those resistances, rather than, say, the Wing Shield. We might find that we have a ton of air resistance or a ton of earth resistance, and because this doesn't come with anything in the way of water or fire resistance, we might need to make up for that in other ways, shapes, or forms, which could be a little bit more difficult. That's the strength of the Glyph Shield. It is versatile in that sense. Then we could specialize a bit in terms of the Shield of Darkness or the Shield of Light. These ones give 3 defense, 3 magic defense. In that respect, they are pretty well rounded. Plus 1 spirit for either of them, but it does give dark resistance in the case of the Shield of Darkness and light resistance in the case of the Shield of Light. Mardek is of course a light elemental character, meaning that he starts out with 20% weakness to darkness and 20% resistance to light. So we could either cover for his weaknesses or emphasize his strengths here. But I think that compared to the other shields that we've picked up, we probably would prefer those because Mardek does also learn some reactions from these abilities here for light resistance and dark resistance. So as long as we have the RP to use those, then that does mean that we have pretty good resistances in both of those instances. So I think for that reason, I'm intrigued by the Glyph Shield. Let's go this route here. Then let's talk accessories. And so, of course, Yellow Fairy and the Scarab of Health, those have typically been our go-to options here, because the Yellow Fairy gives us auto haste, meaning that we go twice as often as we would normally go, so that means that we are, in many ways, just about twice as powerful as we would normally be. Of course, that means that we're sacrificing some nice stats that we might be getting from other items that we put in place of the Yellow Fairy, but still, being able to go twice is huge. So for that reason, the Yellow Fairy is always going to be one of the best options here. Then the Scarab of Health does give us 5 defense, 5 magic defense, which is pretty strong for an accessory, and therefore could cover for the lack of defenses on the Night Jacket. Then also, auto regen does mean that we are getting life restored regularly, don't even need to stop to use a potion or a healing ability, so in that way it is helpful, and in many cases has been enough to keep our characters close, if not at, maximum HP. Then a little bit of resistances to various statuses. Of course, doesn't necessarily mean we can rely on those not getting afflicted, but does give us a little bit of extra defenses in that regard. So, Scarab of Health, also one of our go-tos for all of our previous arena runs as well. If we wanted to make even more of a point of maximizing our resistances, then the Emerald and Sapphire Bangles might be a good way to do that. They give Earth and Water resistance, respectively. The Emerald Bangles also give Vitality and HP, The Sapphire Bangles give Spirit and MP. They also both give 3 defense and 3 magic defense apiece, which is not bad from an accessory slot. So the Emerald Bangles are another one of those items that are really good when you have a character that is low on HP, but because Mardek already has so much, this is maybe not something that is as intriguing to us. And we did, of course, pick up the Night Jacket, which gave us decent earth resistances, as well as the Glyph Shield, which also gives us a bit there. So for that reason, I don't think we're going to need either of these. We could go with the Eclipse Amulet, this giving us pretty high defenses and +2 Spirit, which would boost our MP a little bit, but again is maybe not a huge concern. And then the resistance to light and dark. Dark is maybe not so relevant because, again, we're using the Night Jacket, so we're already would be absorbing the dark damage here, except because Mardek starts out with 20% weakness to dark, this just means that we're taking no damage from it at all. Then if you consider that perhaps we are going to be using our dark reactions here, as long as we're hitting our reactions, that means we'd be going up to 150% resistance from dark attacks and spells. So in that case, as long as we do hit our reactions, yes, we are in fact healing to dark damage. So in that respect, that means that dark resistance, we don't really need much more of it. Oddly enough, even though Mardek is a light elemental character, it does mean that light is one of the elements that we are weakest to at the moment, because we're starting out with the 20, yes, however, we don't get any more from the Night Jacket here. Glyph Shield does not have any more either, so that means that we're starting out with the 20, as long as we can also equip the light physical and magical defenses reactions here, then does mean that we'll get up to 70, so that's still solid, but it doesn't mean that we're outright mitigating light damage, so this would give us a little bit of a boost, at least in the light resistance category, but is that really reason enough to use this when we could be getting something huge, like haste, or the regen and defenses and vitality? I think we probably go with both of these here. So let's throw these on. Next, let's talk helmets here. So this is an interesting option because the Golden M Helm is, I would argue, usually the best all-around helmet in the game. We crafted it with the blacksmith in Xantusia, and we used some pretty valuable materials to make it happen. I think it was gold and a Candriathope, so lots of things that are limited in nature. It does give 6 defense and 3 magic defense, which is the highest you can ever get from a helmet spot, so that is one of the reasons. And it also gives +1 to all attributes, also nice boost in that way. 30% resistance to light is one of those ways that we could, in fact, get all the way up to 100% light resistance once you take into account that we have the 20% that Mardek is starting out with, the 50% from the reactions, that brings us up to 70, add the 30 from this, and we're at 100 as long as we're hitting our reactions, so that would make this a very strong option. Next, let's talk about the Black Hat. So this has low defenses, but would be the best in terms of dark resistances. However, as we were just saying previously, with the Night Jacket on, and our reactions to dark damage, that would mean that we're already healing to dark, so that means that likely we would not need the Black Hat for its dark resistance here, because that is the primary reason we want this. In terms of other things it has going for it, 1 defense, we can definitely do better on other helmets. Could go with the Elf Cap. This gives us pretty strong defenses, 3 and 3 and 20% resistance to Earth. Normally this would be one of the best helmets in terms of pure defenses, except because Mardek is the only one who can use the Golden M Helm, that does mean that this is, in some ways, just a better version of the Elf Cap. The only thing is that it's given light resistance rather than earth resistance, so if we do have a preference between those two things, then we could perhaps go back over to the Elf Cap, but then of course you do have the attributes on the Golden M Helm, which are a bit of a tiebreaker, you could say, in some ways, that make it so that the Golden M Helm is almost always just objectively better than the Elf Cap, but we'll check in terms of where exactly our resistances end up, and maybe we'll find that the earth resistance is better than light. Then we could go with the Skull Helm lastly, another option that does have high defenses, yes, but still at 4 and 2 respectively, is just not as good as the Golden M Helm. It does give +2 vitality, which is a little bit higher than the Golden M Helm. This gives just 1. So in terms of boosting HP, this would be a little bit better, but as I was saying before, I think that Mardek has enough HP to begin with that that's not a major concern, so 1 vitality probably isn't enough of a difference to feel like the Skull Helm is the best option here. So let's go with the Golden M Helm, and I think that, like I said, we'll see if it just so happens that we would find 20% Earth Resistance to be a big difference maker. Then we can consider switching to the Elf Cap instead. So once we equip our skills, then we can double check if that is a switch that we would like to make. Then in terms of potions, of course, we will use our usual HP restoring, MP restoring, status removing, and other damaging and boosting potions down here. So that will be helpful for sure. Mardek, what with his access to other types of elemental damage that we'll talk about in a second, does mean that it's maybe not as relevant for him as it has been for other people. Now let's go to the skills. So let's start with the active skills here, and of course, Mardek, once upon a time, was the primary and in some ways only support character, what with his heal ability here. Of course, many people have learned healing abilities since then, so this is maybe not as significant as it once was, and because we do have a lot of health restoring potions, probably not so relevant in the arena run here. So for that reason, unlikely we'd be using this much, if at all. Regen, if we are using the Scarab of Health, we are automatically starting with regen, and we're always going to have it, so for that reason, this ability here is something that we are certainly never going to use. Remove Taint is similar to heal in that it is a support ability that theoretically we could just use potions to remove those statuses and never have to use this ability and save a little bit of MP along the way. So this is another one that I highly doubt we'll use much of. Then we could put on a physical shield with the shield ability here to have the amount of physical damage that we take, which is not a bad idea. There are some potions that do this, the Mirror Elixir potion, so we could perhaps do that, and for that reason not need to use this ability here. The other thing that the Mirror Elixir potion does is it also applies a magic shield, which means that in one turn we can apply both of those with one potion, rather than spending 2 turns to use both the shield and magic shield ability. So in that way, if we really wanted to put on shields, we would probably prefer to use the potion rather than take more time to use both these abilities here. Then we have Morality Block, which means that we can null light and null dark status effects, so this has been big in the cases of when we've been going against powerful opponents, bosses that deal a lot of light damage or dark damage. So for that reason, there are perhaps some instances when we might be going against really powerful enemies, then we would want to use this. But for the most part, when we're in the arena runs, it seems like we're going against your standard enemies that you'll encounter in random fights along the way. Not so much in the way of bosses, except for perhaps near the end of the arena runs when maybe this could become relevant. So might see us use this once or twice toward the end. Then we have all the slash abilities. So these are the ones that give Mardek his offensive flexibility here with fire, water, air, and earth slash. That means that Mardek can deal any of those types of damage with physical attacks, mind you, so he doesn't have access to any spells. That is perhaps one of his weaknesses in that regard. So if we do find ourselves going against any enemies that have really high physical defense or put on a physical shield, then that could seriously limit the amount of damage that we can deal. There aren't many workarounds for that, of course, because Mardek can't just magically learn a spell, and the damaging potions, they're basically just doing the same things that we would have here, so those don't add too much to the equation here. So now let's talk offensive reactions. And this is another place where Mardek being such a high level starts to pay off big time, because he has so much RP that we can equip everything here. So we have generic damages with plus 10, 20, and 30% damage here. Additional critical strike chance, quarries for undead and spirits, so we'll deal additional 50% damage to them. Degeneration, this one is probably the lowest priority, so if you don't have Mardek at such a high level that we have, then you could probably take this one off to save some RP. This one has a 10% chance of removing the regen status effect on our opponents. It's not very often that we see opponents with that. It's usually bosses that have it, if and when we do find opponents that have it, so again, we're not expecting to see too many of those, so for that reason, I would say this one could do next to nothing for us. Maybe if we're lucky, it removes the regen status on our opponents once. Then we have Drain HP. This one is nice, because it does give us the ability to restore some HP, even when we're dealing our damages. Then the Bleed, this one is actually coming from that Cursed Sword that we picked up in the Miasmal Citadel. So I mastered this, gives us the 20% chance of inflicting that Bleed status. So it's somewhat similar to the Poison status that we saw Sharla and Donovan have the ability to use, in that it can deal some damage. Yes, it's not guaranteed, but even if we do inflict this status on opponents, it takes enough time for that to add up that in all likelihood we'll find that, given that we're likely to go against numerous relatively weak enemies, we're not going to have long enough battles for this to make much of a difference. So this would be another one that if you don't have as much RP as we have here, then you could probably skip this one and save 5 RP in the process. So yeah, in that regard, this is probably another one that is relatively low on the priority list, at least in this case. If we were going against a major boss, then suddenly I would say this becomes much more valuable. Then in terms of physical defenses, this is another place where Mardek has many options because he can wear both heavy armors and shields. Those are two of the items that give the most access to these reactions here. So we have the generic, minus 10, 20, 30% damage there. Then we have resistances to air, light, and dark. This was one of the reasons why I was thinking both from the chest plate and shield spot, we might not have needed as much air resistance because we were talking about how there isn't a air resistance 50% passive ability, unlike things like dark, water, or earth. So for that reason, maybe air is more difficult to maximize the resistances. However, as long as we're hitting our reactions, we've mastered this ability here, then it is functionally the same. So in that way, I'm feeling pretty confident with where we are from an air resistance standpoint as well. Light, dark. Dark, we are of course using the night jacket, so this one is maybe not as necessary. I think without this, we would be at 100% dark resistance. However, this makes it so that we will heal dark damage, so that's not a bad thing as long as we have the RP to do it. And then light, we actually have not been scaling much for the resistances here, so 50% resistance for light is actually arguably one of the most important resistances here. Then the evasion, we'll take that because it's a generic damage mitigation that will apply regardless of what type of damage we would be taking here. So that's nice, and then that leaves us with just the soaks here, which I think are definitely the lowest priority because at this stage in the game, removing 10 damage from the equation is not a big difference here. So we do fortunately have enough RP to throw on Soak 10 and Soak 30. We'll get by fine without access to Soak 20. Then in terms of magic offensive reactions here, you ask yourself, why do these matter? It does technically affect the amount that Mardek heals with his heal ability. That's about it. So again, I don't expect us to use that very much, if at all, so probably not a big factor here. Now let's talk magic defensive reactions here, and Mardek has a reasonable amount of these because although he can't use robes, he does have access to many through shields. So we have the generic ones, minus 10 and 20% damage here. We'll definitely put those on. Let's skip over the soaks for the moment. As I was saying previously, I think that those are typically one of, if not the lowest priorities. And we have a lot of specific elements that we can go for here, and usually I would avoid these because I feel as if we would prefer to have the generic types of damage reduction because it doesn't matter what type of damage we're getting hit by. We don't need to try to predict the future, or are we going to expect more fire damage or dark damage? We don't really know. However, this is one of the strengths of having so much RP, is that there's less of a guessing game here if we can just throw on all of them, or very close to all of them. So I think that we actually do prioritize the elemental resistances here, because if we throw on fire, water, air, earth, and light, that means that we are getting the damage reduction from almost every type of damage. We're passing on dark, yes, but because we have the night jacket here, it does mean that we are, at the very least, mitigating all dark damage. So I think that's still quite alright. We would like to heal from dark if we could, but on this occasion, I don't think we can make it happen. We could perhaps consider trying to find a way to sneak on the spell resist 30%. That would be another way to mitigate damage regardless of what type of element it is, so it's intriguing in that regard. I would normally say prioritize this. Perhaps if you have lower RP and you can't throw on all these element-specific resistances, then I would go that route here. But because we can cover basically everything, we will. Let's talk passive abilities next, and with Mardek being such a high level, that means that we have 34 RP for this as well, and this is going to be huge, because if we look at resistances, that is usually what we prioritize here, and so we can go pretty crazy on these. So let's throw on Rainbow Aura for 20% resistance to basically everything. That means that previously we were talking about how we were only mitigating 100% of dark damage, but we weren't healing to it. This, adding 20% resistance from the Rainbow Aura, does mean that now, even without the reactions, we are still healing to dark damage. So for that reason, we probably do pass on dark resistance here, and then that means that we actually have enough RP to throw on fire, water, and earth resistance here. So that is ridiculous. And dark may not be doing much for us. Ether theoretically could. We don't have much in the way of ether resistances at the moment. Of course, we don't have any reactions that boost our ether resistance. We are getting 20% from the Rainbow Aura. Nothing on our gear, though, so that means that that 20% resistance is just about it. However, as I've said for previous characters, I do find that ether resistance is probably the least relevant because there are relatively few enemies that deal ether damage. It does happen, but I think we'll take that risk. Let's take a look at where that leaves us in terms of resistances, because if we look here, this is what I mean. Fire damage, we heal. Water damage, we heal. Earth damage, we heal. Dark damage, we heal. You say, oh, Lids, I don't know, air resistance is only 56, light is only 70. We have reactions for both of these things, for both magic and physical defenses. So that means that if we hit our reactions, we are gaining an additional 50% resistance to air. So we're at 106 in that case, so we are still healing to air damage as well as long as we hit that reaction. We also have 50% resistance to light as long as we hit our reactions for either magic or physical attacks, so that means that we're at 120 in that case. We're healing to this as well. So Mardek cannot take damage from fire, water, light, earth, air, or dark as long as we hit our reactions. Ether and Fig, those are truly just 20% here, but as I was saying, I think these are so uncommon that we'll live with this. But that means that Mardek is nearly indestructible. You ask yourself, okay, well, how can he go down then in that case? If we don't hit our reactions, then of course we could take damage from either air or light. We could always take damage from Ether or Fig. The other thing is that statuses, Mardek has a little bit of resistances to those from Scarab of Health, but we could say pick up a poison, take some damage from that. Pick up a bleed, take some damage from that. Those would be ways that we could take damage, yes, but we are also getting the automatic regen from the Scarab of Health, which should mitigate much, if not all, of that damage that we might be taking from those statuses. So for that reason, yes, this is why hitting this much RP on Mardek makes him almost unstoppable. So that'll make for an interesting setup here. Let's save before we head in. Okay, so let's get going here. But then, hold on a second. Before we do that, I forgot one thing. Okay, let me just make a quick change to Mardek's gear here. And then we can throw on this, and then now we should be good to go, right? Okay, so we'll enter a tournament, and then we'll do Mardek's. He's the only one left. Lids, you say, what on earth have you done? We put on the cursed sword. Well, I tell you, it was just a little too straightforward. What with us having so many resistances being so strong, right? We had to find a way to add a little bit of challenge. You might have remembered me saying, with Vern, well, we could have thrown it on, but that would have been madness, right? How could we have used the cursed sword here? It gives us automatic curse, gives us automatic bleed, meaning we'll take damage, meaning we won't be able to use any of Mardek's abilities. What are we gonna do? I'll be honest with you, I don't know if we can do this. It may be impossible to complete this run with the cursed sword, but we are gonna try. So, here goes nothing. First enemy here is a monster. That monster is 50% resistant to dark damage. Cursed Sword does deal dark damage, so that is going to be our biggest weakness here, is that against enemies that deal to dark damage, we are gonna have to rely on our damaging potions. So hopefully that works out for us. We could perhaps still get by here with a physical attack. Let's see how much damage we deal with this. You are resisting it, yes, but you do also get cursed, and oh, you are quick enough to go again. So our bleed and our regen basically cancel out. So in that way, it means that at least the Scarab of Health is compensating for one of the biggest weaknesses on our sword here, but it does have high base damage, so that helps us, and it does leech life, so we did get back up to full there. So we just hope that we don't run into many dark-resistant enemies here, but remember that the enemies that we encounter are, of course, based on the specific character who is doing this, and with Mardek being a light character, could find ourselves going against a fair bit of dark characters. Here are some enemies, and as long as we get our reaction here, we will heal to this, so that is one of the strengths, our biggest strength, of course, and so one of the reasons why I was feeling like, yes, perhaps we could still get this done. Let's take a look at the yellow souls here. They are, yes, actually weak to dark, so that looks fantastic. Let's hit them, and yes, deal all the damage we need to deal to take them out. Mardek, of course, can only take out one enemy at a time, does not have any abilities that damage multiple people, so for that reason, one of his other weaknesses would be going against large groups like this. But hey, we have enough ways to restore HP that even if we are taking damage every turn, it may not matter. Alright, who's next? Bring it on. Purple Mantids, they will go first. As we were saying before, Mardek is quite slow, so many enemies will go before us. So these guys have a lot of HP, but they don't have any dark resistance. They do have 6 physical defense, but let's try hitting them with a normal attack here. Of course, we can't use any fire slashes, water slashes, air slashes, or earth slashes, which means our flexibility that we were talking about previously with regard to our elemental damage, we don't have that unless we were to use our damaging potions, so those will be big. We are not holding on to too many balls of acid here, so that could be a difference maker as well. We hope that we are not relying on the earth damage at any point in time, otherwise we might run out of those. Let's try just normal attacks, and yes, it's enough damage to take you out. As for the second Mantid here, yes, enough for you as well. And one thing that I've noticed with the Cursed Blade is that it does seem as though the amount of damage that we're dealing, it's a little bit deceptive. You'd say, well, we dealt the perfect amount of damage for both of those ones, we just barely took it out. It does seem as though it never deals more damage than it needs to deal. So if we, say, have an enemy with 4,034 life and we attack it, we will never deal more than 4,034 damage. So it's hard to tell what our actual maximum damage would be in that regard. However, the Black Eye is one of those enemies that we did not want to run into because it does heal dark damage, so our physical attacks are very bad in that regard. It is also weak to Earth, and that is the element that we were hoping we wouldn't have to do too much damage in because we have the least in terms of those damaging potions. Let's go the air route instead here. Let's see how many of the liquid lightnings we have. Will be enough? Decent damage there, and well, at least it can't hurt us if it's dealing only dark damage. So then let's go back. The liquid lightnings again, and we have enough of these that I think this should be doable. But even if this guy is healing us, bear in mind that if we can't deal any damage, then we'll be a stalemate. We'd still be trapped. It does throw on a shield, but I'm not sure that's going to make too much of a difference here. Keep on throwing these liquid lightnings. Does mitigate the damage from it, though. It does cut it in half. It means we will need to use more of them, and does mean if we're relying on lightning damage going forward, then this could become more difficult. I missed that reaction there, but again, we healed the dark, so not a huge problem. Taking damage is not the issue here. The issue is dealing damage and not using all of our items that deal air damage. So, throw on another liquid lightning here, and we really hope that we don't run into any more of these guys. We actually stunned us. We did not throw on any status immunities here. We used all of our passive RP on boosting our resistances. So Black Eye down, however, that was a difficult opponent for sure. We're hoping we don't run into any more of those or any other similar enemies that are also healing to dark damage. Next is a Dreamfish. We've seen a few of these on other people's arena runs. Did cause us to go to sleep, but we did... Oh, I thought we woke up there. Apparently not, though. Not on either turn, so we get hit again. And our regen is not healing more than the damage we're taking from the bleed, so that does mean that we are starting to take a bit of damage, and it's starting to add up a bit. However, you are not weak or resistant to dark damage, so we could go this route here with just a default attack and save more of our potions. Let's try this. You were pretty evasive, though. 50% evasion, so we do have the physical offensive reaction for plus 50% accuracy that should help here, but by no means is this hit guaranteed. It will hit us again, and yeah, okay. Apply to sleep, and then got rid of the sleep. We are no longer asleep. We are still paralyzed and did lose a turn to that, so we could perhaps consider using a motion potion to remove that paralysis now, so that it doesn't become an issue going forward. Might be worthwhile, because that will, of course, carry over from one battle into the next. We just hope that you don't proceed to reapply it right there. You didn't. So now we can definitely take a turn, and we are hoping we land a hit here. That we did, and we did leech back up to full HP. That is another one of the strengths of the Cursed Blade, that leeching. As long as we are trying to leech from enemies that are healing to dark damage, in that case, that would actually mean that we are dealing damage to ourselves with that leech. Round 6, okay. Now, more dark resistant enemies, yes. However, you guys only had 50% resistance, so we can still take you out. I think it did take us 2 turns to do this previously, but I think we can still deal with that. That's fine. It will hit us, and you have some damage here, at least the second one missed. But we should be able to leech most, if not all of that back. Okay. And, well, yes, that is the case. Still not enough to take it out in one hit here. And deal more damage, but we should be able to leech this one back as well. Are we back up to full? Yes, we are. Okay. So still in solid shape here. We're more than halfway through the arena now. Of course, we are running a little bit low on some of those damaging potions. That is the thing that I'm most concerned about, because if we do find ourselves against any dark healing enemies and we run out of those potions, then we're in trouble. We are quite literally stuck in that case. Griffins, we've seen lots of these guys in other arena runs who are weak to dark, though, so that means that we certainly have an answer for you. That is, taking you out in one hit with a default attack. And lots of drops for us as well. Round 8, we're getting close now. Likely more mini-bosses. Oh, okay. some elementals here, which are, we're gonna have to take a look. How resistant are they to dark damage? Well, in terms of them dealing damage to us, of course, they're dealing earth, fire, and water damage, and as long as we hit our reactions, we are definitely healing to those. In fact, we're healing to those even if we don't hit our reactions. Let's see, are you resistant to dark? A little bit. Could we get by with just using the default attack here and save some of our damaging potions? I think we probably do want to try to do that, because there definitely would be a pretty simple solution here if we were to, say, use a really cold water on the fire elemental, liquid lightning on the earth elemental, and then bottle acid on the water elemental. Yes, however, we are fairly low on these, so I'd like to save them if and when we can. The risk here would be that by attacking them, we may not take them out in one hit. They do have fairly high physical defenses with 20, and they're still mitigating half of our damage. And one of the reasons why that is an issue is because if you use a physical attack against them and you do not take them out in one hit, that means that they will turn around and use a reaction against you, that being, in the case of the fire elemental, a fire spell, water elemental, a water spell, and the earth elemental, an earth spell. However, that's not a risk for us because we are healing to all those, so for that reason we can play it patiently here. And even if this doesn't take you out in one hit, this reaction here, no problem at all. So why don't we just take you out? Just takes 2 hits here, and these guys quite literally cannot damage us. They can only heal us. So in some ways, if we had taken damage in previous rounds and we were concerned about that, we could take this as an opportunity to heal up. We can actually take you out in one hit, so that's good. And then you, likewise. See there, even with the crit, we still dealt exactly the right amount of damage to take it out, so for some reason that is a thing with Cursed Sword. We are also very close to running out of inventory space here. We have 1 spot remaining, so we might need to actually ignore some of the things we drop from enemies we encounter here. This is the second to last round, so hopefully that doesn't become a factor, but we'll see. It is a molester, and this could be an issue. We've seen these guys in many previous arena runs as well. However, they do heal to dark, which means that we will likely want to use some kind of damaging potion here, because we can't deal any damage with our default attacks. Let's go for the type of potion that we have the most of, because there's no difference between hitting you with fire, water, air, or earth damage here. And we do have the most of these alchemist fires, so let's go this route. Don't think we're going to run out of those anytime soon, and at 1,000 damage apiece, that's not bad. So, of course, this guy also shouldn't be able to do too much damage to us because we heal to dark. If it does have physical attacks that could damage us, that is one thing that I forgot to mention when we were talking about is Mardek unkillable with this current setup. We, of course, do not have 100% resistance to physical damage, and it's a little bit less common in Chapter 3. We saw a lot of it in, certainly, Chapter 1 and a lot in Chapter 2, but most enemies are dealing some other kind of damage here that's a little more specialized, so it's not that often that that happens, but of course, if we were to get hit by a big physical damage attack, then that would be quite dangerous for us. So this guy might be capable of doing a bit of that, but let's stick with our recipe for success here, the Alchemist Fires. And one more should do it here. And this is another enemy that was difficult, yes, not as much as the Black Eye, actually, because that one was... we were dealing less damage to that one, and then it ultimately even threw on a shield, which cut our damage in half, so it took a while, and we had to use a lot of our potions there. It means that for round 10, are we going to have enough to get it done? Depends who it's against. More monsters, 3 of them, although they do resist dark damage, not a huge problem. We can still take them out with the default attack, so I think we have this one made. Does mean they will get the chance to attack us here, and there is some physical damage there, and somewhat significant amount at that when they do land a hit. So these guys are perhaps a little bit on the dangerous side for that reason, but we can leech back some of that HP here, in fact all of that HP here. So for that reason, not terribly concerned. I think we have this. Famous last words, of course. Watch one of these guys crit us for 1,500 damage. As long as we can take out, well, speaking of crits, as long as we can take out one of them here, then I think that does mean that just 1v1, I doubt this guy can take us on, right? He's gonna miss. He's succumbing to the pressure. Let's finish it with style. So with that, don't do this. Do not use the Cursed Sword when you are going into Mardek's Arena Run. But it is possible, in case you were wondering. It is possible to get the job done. Except, also, don't use all of your inventory spaces with a bunch of junk items like monster fangs, because then you won't be able to pick up the item at the end of this. So, yeah, congratulations, fighter. You've won the tournament, apparently. Here, have a prize. Also, get out of here. Also, okay. Success, yes, with an asterisk. So congratulations, Mardek, indeed, for completing your arena run here. I hope that you enjoy your arena prize, that of course being your monster fangs. Very well deserved, and they give us the whopping 0 abilities, 0 defenses, 0 resistances. It is the best item in the game, for sure. But let's have a quick chat with our latest tournament champion here. So Mardek, what do you and Rohoff have to say about that? Fascinating. A village of yet another sentient race, hidden away like this? I can perhaps understand their reasoning for wishing to remain distant. But alas, I shan't elaborate. You wouldn't like it. Alright, a little strange there. So Mardek and Rohoff perhaps more intrigued by the trilobite civilization in here that they've, of course, already seen than they are with leveling up and completing their own arena run. But that does, of course, mean that we are done with everyone's personal arena runs, and now we are onto the full-blown party arena. That does mean that instead of being a 10-round arena, it'll be up to 20-round arena, much like we had back in the Chapter 2 version of that. So we'll have to think about what our preferred setup is for all of that stuff, because of course we've now leveled people up and mastered many skills and talked about how they perform by themselves, but we'll want to think more about how people work together, especially in their new, more powerful states. So with that, I'll leave you off here, so prepare yourself for the big arena run next time. I'll see you then.